town-forced fat girl into human livestock pen at fair, mountain man tore down the bars and bellowed, "Step right up and see the wonder no barn ever held." Damian Blackwood crowed from the fairground dais, his hat tipped like a showman's blade. "The human hog!" Laughter broke across Black Ridge, Montana, like thrown corn, fast, careless, hungry. Brass band horns blared, steam from roasting beef curled into a sky too blue for what was happening beneath it. They dragged Prudence Prue Hargrove to the pen they'd welded special. Bars thick as wrists, floor splinter rough, a slop trough hammered from dented tin. A sign hung higher than her dignity could reach. Human hog, Prudence Hargrove. Estimated weight, 200 pounds. Do not feed. Already fat enough. Coins chimed into a pail each time someone paid to gawk. Children were lifted for a better look. Grown men, who would later call themselves decent, tried out jokes they'd never say in church. Prue stumbled inside and turned small in a corner she couldn't make smaller. Her hair was a tangle, her breath a thin whistle. She had mucked out pens for years, but never from this side of the bars. Every taunt struck like a thrown stone. Make it squeal. Bet it eats from the trough if it gets hungry enough. Smile for the camera, hog girl. The brass band swung into a foolish waltz. Damian paced the perimeter, spinning cruelty into commerce. 25 cents to interact. Toss a cabbage, take a photograph, prod the curiosity of nature. The mayor laughed beside him, ringed by men who mistook a crowd for a conscience. By noon, the air stank of hay, grease, and cheap whiskey. Something in Prue began to untether. She pressed her forehead to the bars to feel anything that wasn't a word. "I am a person," she told herself. The thought came back, dented. Late afternoon brought the premium viewing. They roped off a closer lane, charged double, and let the bold pass near enough to breathe on her. A boy jabbed a stick between the rails. A woman tossed a bruised apple and clapped when Prue flinched. Damian raised his hands for silence like a conductor summoning a finale. "Ladies and gentlemen, proof that some folks belong with stock, not citizens." The ground answered first, a hush that moved through sawdust and shadow. Then a voice, low as gravel under a thaw, rolled the length of the midway. "Open it!" Heads turned. A man stood at the edge of the ring, tall enough to make tents look stunted, broad enough to make the gate look small. Colossus, coal, iron forge, the freighters whispered. The trapper who traded twice a season and looked the rest of the year like the mountain had kept him. Hair black as wet stone hung to his shoulders, a battered trail coat wrapped him like weather. His eyes were dark, steady coals. Damian smirked. "Private exhibit, friend. Move along." Cole didn't. He walked to the pen, took one bar in his palm, and closed his fist. Iron groaned. Sawdust lifted in the sudden quiet. He set both hands and pulled. The rail bowed like green willow, then screamed and tore free. Another went, then another, until a gap yawned where spectacle had been. He stepped through. Up close he smelled of pine and hard miles. "Look at me," he said, and Prue's eyes climbed from the floor to the face that had put a hole in a cage and called it nothing. "You're leaving now." He shrugged his coat from his shoulders and wrapped it around her, heavy and honest, the way winters are. With a knife bright as noon, he cut the padlock shank, then the rope that bit her wrists. The sign above them swung once and stilled. Damian found an official voice. "Sir, you're destroying town property." Cole looked over his shoulder, voice even. "You built this to sell shame. you can buy new iron." He turned back to Prue. "Stand if you can. I'll carry you if you can't." She rose, shaking, the crowd parting because something older than law told them to. Band music stuttered and died. The mayor's smile curdled. Cole lifted Prue as if she were a person and not a lesson, stepped through the place where bars had been, and faced Black Ridge's gathered decency. "If any of you think this ends with her in a cage," he said, "you think wrong. Where are you listening from? What town? What country? Tell me so I can greet you by name in the next chapter." Cole Ironforge walked out of the fairground with the woman in his arms and the entire town too stunned to breathe. Dust rose behind his boots. The brass band stood frozen, horns drooping in their hands. Prue felt the thrum of his heartbeat beneath the coarse hide of his coat, a rhythm steady as the earth, nothing like the crowd's laughter that still scraped through her memory. No one followed, no one dared. He didn't speak until they reached the hitching rail where his mule cart waited, half loaded with salt blocks and pelts. He set her carefully in the wagon bed, then leaned down to meet her eyes. "You hurt anywhere I can't see?" She shook her head, then whispered, "Only inside." He nodded once. "That's the harder kind." He climbed up, clicked the reins, and steered the mule toward the dirt road out of Black Ridge. Behind them, the fair sputtered back to life. Timid laughter, music forced through cracked pride. But for Prue, that town was already a ghost she'd buried alive. They reached his rented cabin by twilight, a small one-room shelter near the tree line where the plains began to rise into foothills. Smoke from his own chimney was the only sign of life. Cole lifted her down again, slower this time, as if afraid she might break. Inside, he lit a lamp, and the place came to life. Walls of rough-hewn pine, a table scarred by knives, a single bed, a wood stove that breathed the scent of ash and rain. "You'll rest there," he said, nodding toward the bed. "Fire'll take the chill off soon enough." Prue hesitated at the threshold. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know who I am." "I know what they did," he said simply. "That's enough." When he turned to stoke the fire, she saw the deep scars across his knuckles, the kind earned from both work and war. She wanted to ask more, but exhaustion pulled her under before she could. When Prue woke, sunlight striped the walls. A blanket covered her shoulders, his, not hers, and a pot of porridge simmered on the stove. Cole sat in a chair near the door, sharpening a hunting knife with calm precision. His coat hung drying by the hearth. She sat up quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sleep in your bed." He looked over, unbothered. "You needed it more." She flinched at the tenderness in his tone. It had been years since anyone spoke to her without cruelty hidden inside the words. "I should go," she murmured. "They'll come looking." "They won't." He poured coffee into a tin cup. "The mayor's too proud to admit what I saw. Blackwood family's reputation means more to him than your name ever did." She frowned. "Then where will I go?" Cole's eyes were steady, dark as the river after storm. "Anywhere but back there." He slid the cup toward her. The smell of roasted beans filled the silence. "Drink. Strength first, choices after." She wrapped her hands around the tin and tried not to cry. "They made me believe I was something less than human," she said quietly. "For years. Maybe they were right." Cole's head lifted. "No one who survives what you did is less than anything." The words hit her like warmth after frost. Painful, necessary. By noon, Prue's strength returned enough for her to stand outside. The mountains loomed to the west, snow-topped, immense, unyielding. Cole came up beside her, wiping his hands on a rag. "I head up there tomorrow," he said. "Home's higher, past the timberline. I only come down to trade supplies." Prue glanced at the sky. "That's where you'll take me." He shook his head. "That's where I live. Where I'll take you depends on you." Her pulse quickened. "You mean I can't stay?" "I'm not a kind man, Prue. Not for long. The mountain's rough. It takes and doesn't give." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something behind his eyes. Not cruelty, not pity, but fear. "You wouldn't last the winter up there." She squared her shoulders, the weight of humiliation burning away into something harder. "I lasted the fair," she said. "I'll last anything." For a long moment he said nothing. Then the corner of his mouth twitched, half amusement, half respect. "You've got more grit than sense." "I'll take that as a compliment." "It was one." He sighed, then nodded toward the cabin. "You can come, but you'll pull your weight." "I wouldn't have it any other way." He studied her one last time, as if testing the truth of what she'd said, then turned toward the cart. "Dawn, then. Don't oversleep." That night, while the fire burned low, Prue lay awake listening to the wind claw at the shutters. For the first time, her mind didn't replay the crowd's laughter. Instead, it clung to a single image: the man who had torn down iron bars without asking permission, the man who had called her you, not it. And in that fragile quiet, she allowed herself a thought she hadn't dared in years. Maybe tomorrow wouldn't hurt quite as much. Dawn crawled across the plains like a pale animal when they left Black Ridge behind. Frost still clung to the grass. The mule's breath steamed in the cold. Prue sat beside Cole on the wagon bench, wrapped in his spare coat. Each turn of the wheels carried her farther from the town that had named her human hog, and closer to something she couldn't yet name. Cole drove without speaking. His hands were big and scarred, the veins raised like cords beneath his skin. Now and then he glanced at her, not long enough to make her flinch, but enough to be sure she was still upright. The mule plodded on, steady and patient, following the faint ruts that led toward the mountain range. When the sun finally climbed, the peaks flashed white like the teeth of giants. "That's home," Cole said. Prue studied the horizon. "Looks cold." "It is," he answered. "Keeps liars away." They stopped at noon near a creek where ice still glazed the edges. Cole knelt, breaking it open with his knife, then filled a tin cup. "Drink," he said. "You'll need the strength." Prue obeyed, kneeling opposite him. "You've lived up there long?" "9 years." "Alone?" He shrugged. "Company don't stick long in the high country." Prue traced circles in the dirt with her boot. "You could have left me to rot in that pen. Why didn't you?" Cole's eyes lifted, the dark pupils sharp against the sunlight. "Because I remember what it's like to hear people laugh and know they mean to break you." He straightened. "Now get back on the wagon. We've got another 10 miles before camp." By evening, the road thinned into a trail of stone and pine needles. The air grew colder. Even the mule's breath came out in short, silver clouds. They reached a small clearing, and Cole began setting camp with the precision of habit, unhitching the animal, stacking kindling, lighting a small fire shielded from the wind by rocks. Prue tried to help. "I can gather more wood," she said. "Fine," he replied, handing her a hatchet. "Cut what's dry. Green wood just smokes." She carried the tool into the trees, her fingers numb but determined. The forest was alive with small noises, cracking branches, the whisper of snow dusting the ground. She thought of the cage, the laughter, the sign, and swung harder than she needed to. Splinters flew. When she returned, cheeks flushed, Cole looked up from the fire. "Good," he said. "You work like someone who wants to live." Prue dropped the wood beside him. "I do." He nodded once, then poured soup into 2 tin cups. They ate in silence, the only sounds the fire's crackle and the wind sighing through the pines. After a while, Prue asked softly, "What made you leave town for good?" Cole poked at the fire. "People." He let the word sit there, flat and heavy. "Sometimes it's easier to listen to wolves than to men." "What about family?" He hesitated, jaw tightening. "Had one. The mountain took what was left." Prue's heart thudded. She didn't press further. The flames painted his face in bronze and shadow, and she wondered what kind of grief could make a man so strong and so alone at once. Later, when the fire had burned low, Cole rolled out his bedroll a few feet away from her. "Get some rest," he said. "We move at first light." Prue lay back, staring at the stars above the treetops. They were so close it felt like she could touch them. The world had never been this quiet, and she didn't know if it comforted or frightened her. "Cole?" she whispered. He grunted in reply. "Do you think it's possible to forget what they did to me?" His answer came after a long pause. "No, but you can live in a place they can't reach." Prue swallowed the lump in her throat. "I want that." "You're on your way," he said, and she heard the faint trace of something almost like kindness in his tone. The next morning, the trail turned steep. Cole walked beside the wagon, leading the mule by the reins. Prue followed on foot, clutching her shawl against the wind. Each breath came sharp and cold. Each step sank into snow. When she stumbled, Cole offered his hand. "Careful," he said. "Ground's slick here." Prue hesitated before taking it, her fingers small and pale in his. His palm was rough but warm, steadying her just enough to keep moving. For a moment, the wind fell away, and all she could hear was the echo of her heartbeat between the cliffs. By midday, they reached a ridge where the land opened wide. The valley stretched below, endless gold and green, and far beyond it, the faint smudge of Black Ridge. Prue turned to look back one last time. "I thought I'd die there," she said quietly. "I was sure of it." Cole's gaze followed hers. "Maybe you did. Maybe what's walking now is someone new." The words sank deep into her chest. She wanted to believe him. They camped again that night near a frozen lake. Cole skinned a rabbit he'd trapped, while Prue gathered snow to melt for water. When she handed him the pot, he caught her eye and said, "You learn fast." She smiled faintly. "I've had good reason to." He stared into the flames for a while, then said, almost to himself, "Beatrice used to say that. My wife." The firelight flickered across his face, softening it. Prue waited, sensing he hadn't spoken her name aloud in years. "She was strong," he continued, "strong enough to stand against a storm, but storms don't care who they take." "I'm sorry," Prue whispered. Cole shook his head. "Don't be. Just remember, people like us don't survive by luck. We survive by refusing to die when the world says we should." The wind picked up, scattering sparks into the night. Prue pulled the blanket tighter and whispered, "Then I'll refuse too." Cole looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Good," In that quiet place between grief and survival, something fragile began to form. Not love yet, but recognition. Two lives bent by cruelty, now standing against it together. The fire burned low, the mountain loomed dark and endless ahead, and for the first time, Prue didn't feel caged by it. She felt called. Snow began to fall again before they reached the cabin, big lazy flakes that spun like feathers in the wind. The mule's ears twitched under the cold, and Prue's breath puffed in clouds. Cole trudged ahead, breaking the path through the drifts. When he finally stopped, she almost walked into him. The cabin stood at the edge of a clearing half buried under snow. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin but steady, and an old axe leaned against a chopping block by the door. The mountain wrapped around the place like a guardian, towering pines, frozen creek, the faint echo of wolves far off in the dusk. Cole's voice came low. "This is it, my place, now ours, for as long as you stay." Prue swallowed hard, unsure what to say. He led her inside, ducking through the low doorway, and the warmth hit her like a wave. The cabin smelled of cedar smoke, iron, and coffee. A fire burned in the hearth, casting light on shelves lined with tools, jars of dried herbs, and a single carved bear that watched from the mantel. One bed, one table, two chairs, no pictures. Cole hung his coat, kicked snow off his boots, and motioned toward the fire. "Sit. You got the look of someone half-iced." Prue sank down on the rug near the flames, rubbing her hands together. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Small," he replied, "but it keeps the storms out." He poured water from the kettle into 2 tin mugs and handed her one. "Drink slow. You've been running on nothing but fear and wind for too long." Prue smiled faintly. "You talk like fear's a thing that burns calories." Cole cracked the ghost of a grin. "It does. Burns everything if you let it." The next morning, sunlight struck through the frost on the window, scattering shards of gold across the floorboards. Cole was already outside splitting wood, each swing measured and sure. Prue watched from the doorway, breath catching at the rhythm, steady, unhurried, strong enough to make the axe sing. When he caught her watching, he said without turning, "You'll learn this too. If you're to stay, you need to work." "I want to," she said quickly. "I can cook, clean, patch clothes." "You'll do all that," he said, pausing mid-swing, "but you'll also learn the mountain's language, how to read sky and snow, how to know when it's mercy and when it's warning. The mountain has moods?" He looked over his shoulder. "Don't everything?" That day, Prue started small, sweeping, tending the fire, mending his worn shirts with careful stitches. In the evenings, they shared quiet suppers, stew thick with rabbit and barley, coffee black enough to chase the cold. Cole spoke little, but his silence never pressed on her like judgment. It felt safe. 2 weeks later, the mountain turned wild. The wind roared like a wounded beast, slamming against the shutters. Cole had warned her this would happen. Up here, storms come with teeth. They spent the night reinforcing the door, feeding the fire until it painted the room in gold. The blizzard's howl grew so loud it drowned thought. When a gust cracked open the chimney flap, sparks rained over the rug. Prue gasped, but Cole was already there, stamping them out, pulling the metal latch back into place. He turned to her, snow melting in his beard, eyes blazing with that same fire that had melted iron bars. "Don't fear the noise," he said. "It's only wind shouting to be let in." Prue managed a shaky smile. Sounds like the fair crowd. He looked at her, really looked, and said, Difference is, this storm doesn't know you. It doesn't mean you harm. Something broke in her then, quiet and sudden. She sank onto the floor and began to sob, not out of fear, but release. Cole hesitated only a moment before kneeling beside her. He didn't say, Don't cry. He didn't try to fix it. He just sat there, his great hand resting gently on her shoulder until the storm outside softened to a whisper. When she finally looked up, she whispered, No one's ever waited out a storm with me before. He met her gaze. Then they were fools. After that night, the silence between them changed. It was no longer wary. It was comfortable, alive. Cole began teaching her the ways of the mountain, how to set traps without losing fingers, how to tell when snow hid ice beneath, how to skin a rabbit with care. Prue learned fast. Her hands, once used only for chores, grew capable and strong. When she burned her first loaf of bread in the iron stove, she laughed instead of apologizing. Cole took a bite anyway. Not bad, he said deadpan. You're lying, she teased. Course, he admitted, and that almost smile returned. At night, they talked more. Not much, but enough. She told him about the days before the fair, how she'd cared for animals no one else would touch, how she'd been mocked for her body long before the cage. He listened without interrupting. When she asked about his scars, he said only, Old debts, all paid. But she caught him sometimes staring at the carved bear on the mantel with eyes gone far away. One night, Prue woke screaming. In her dream, she'd been back in the pen, bars closing, laughter echoing. She sat up, gasping. The fire had gone low. Cole was already at her side, hand on her shoulder. Prue, you're safe. She pressed her fists to her eyes. They were throwing things. I could feel it, smell it. Cole's voice stayed low, steady as stone. That's memory. It can't touch you here. But it does, she said through tears. It touches everything. He hesitated, then reached for the fur blanket near the hearth, the same one he'd wrapped her in at the fair. He draped it over her shoulders again. Then let this touch it back, he said. The gesture undid her. She leaned into him sobbing, and he let her. His arms were solid, unyielding, but his voice was quiet as falling snow. They broke the bars once. That's enough breaking for one lifetime. When her breathing finally eased, she whispered, I'll never forget that you came for me. Cole stared into the fire. I didn't come for you, Prue. I came because no one else would. But when she drifted back to sleep against his shoulder, his hand stayed there long after, guarding her from ghosts he couldn't see. By spring, the snow began to melt from the eaves. Water trickled down the path like veins returning to a body. Prue's cheeks had color now. Her laughter filled the cabin like sunlight. Cole still rose early and spoke little, but sometimes she caught him humming under his breath, a tune that hadn't been sung since grief first claimed him. One afternoon, she was mending a torn coat when he stopped at the door, watching her. You've made this place different, he said. How so? Quieter, he said, but not lonely. She smiled. That's a first, he nodded. For both of us. That night, as they shared supper, Prue said softly, When I first came here, I thought this was a hiding place. Now I think it's the first home I've ever had. Cole's eyes met hers across the firelight. Then you've earned it. They ate in silence after that, but it wasn't empty. It was the sound of two people rebuilding something the world had tried to tear down. Spring melted into summer, and the mountain softened. Wild flowers climbed the slopes where ice had ruled for months, and the creek behind the cabin roared with meltwater. Prue tended the small garden she had planted, onions, turnips, and hardy herbs, while Cole repaired the roof before the next season's storms. Life had fallen into rhythm. Work, warmth, silence that meant peace, not distance, yet beneath it something restless stirred, like thunder rumbling behind distant hills. One evening, Cole returned from his monthly trip to the trading post with supplies and a sealed envelope tucked into his coat pocket. Prue was kneading dough when she noticed the look on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked. He set the envelope on the table. "It's from the county marshal." Her hand stilled. "Are they looking for me?" "Not you," he said quietly. "Me." He didn't open the letter, only stared at it until the dough began to dry under her fingers. Finally, she reached out and touched his arm. "Then let's read it together." He hesitated before tearing the seal. His voice was low as he read aloud. "Notice of inquiry into the deaths of bounty hunters reported 9 years prior near Iron Forge Peak. Parties requesting your appearance in Black Ridge to provide statement. Failure to comply may result in warrant renewal." Prue's chest tightened. "Those men were killers," Cole said, "but the law doesn't remember that part." She stepped closer. "Will they come here?" "Maybe," he said, folding the letter. "Maybe that's what the wind's been trying to tell me." For the first time since she'd known him, Cole looked uncertain, not afraid, but weary, as if the ghosts of his past had finally found the trail back home. Within a week, the first sign arrived. A hunter passing through told them that Black Ridge was buzzing with talk. Some said the mountain beast had kidnapped a woman. Others claimed the woman was the same human hog who'd escaped the fair, that she had run off with a fugitive. The story twisted like a knife, gaining uglier edges with every retelling. Prue listened, numb. "So now we're both monsters." Cole's voice was quiet. "They call names when they're scared to look at themselves." "But they'll come," she said, "to prove their story's true." He didn't deny it. That night, as thunder crawled over the peaks, Prue found him sitting outside, sharpening his old rifle by lantern light. She sat beside him, the fur blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Tell me about Beatrice," she said softly. "Please." Cole's hand stopped moving. For a long moment, the only sound was the rasp of wind in the pines. "She was my wife," he said at last. "We built this place together. She laughed more than I deserved. When bounty men came looking, she stood between them and the door." Prue swallowed hard. "She died because they were after you." He nodded once. "And because I believed the law cared about truth." "Do you still believe that?" He looked out toward the dark. "No. I believe in what my hands can defend." Silence fell between them, heavy, but not cruel. Prue reached out, resting her fingers over his. "Then let these hands protect more than just regret." His eyes lifted to hers, storm dark, searching. "You'd fight for this life, even knowing what they'll say?" "They've already said it all," she replied. "But I've learned something here, Cole. The only cage worse than iron is shame." Something in him shifted then, barely visible, but real. He set the rifle aside and let her hold his scarred hand until the storm passed. A few days later, Cole's instincts proved right. Tracks appeared along the lower ridge, horses shod in steel, at least 5 riders. Prue found him crouched over them at dawn, jaw tight. "They're not hunters," he said. "Lawmen, or worse." "Coming for you?" "Coming for us." They spent the next hours in silent preparation. Prue gathered supplies, packed food, and filled the water flasks while Cole checked weapons and strengthened the door. She could feel the mountain itself holding its breath. That night, when the wind shifted, they heard it, the distant echo of hooves and men's voices, faint but coming closer. Cole stood by the window, watching lightning crawl along the horizon. "I can lead them off," he said. "You stay here till they pass. They want me, not you." "No," Prue said, stepping forward. "If they find me alone, they'll drag me back to Black Ridge as proof of their story. The fat girl in the pen, tamed by the beast. I won't give them that ending." He turned to her, anger flashing in his eyes, not at her but at the truth. "Then what?" She met his gaze. "Then we stand." He studied her for a long, terrible moment, then nodded once. "You've got the fire for it." "It's the only thing they couldn't take." Later, as they waited, Prue sat near the fire, her hands trembling despite herself. Cole came over, placing his palm gently against her back. "You're shaking." "I'm trying not to," she said. "But I keep thinking, if they take us, if they kill us, no one will ever know the truth." Cole's voice was low. "Truth doesn't die with us. It just changes shape." She turned to look at him. "Cole, there's something I never told you." He raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't innocent," she said. "That day at the fair, I didn't steal bread. But months before, I did steal something, a book. From the church library, a collection of poems." Her voice broke. "They called it sin. I just wanted to read." Cole blinked, then shook his head slowly. "You didn't steal. You reclaimed what should have been yours." Tears burned her eyes. "You always know the right thing to say." He gave a small, sad smile. "That's because I've lived long enough to know how wrong I used to be." The firelight flickered between them, turning the room to gold and shadow. Outside, thunder rolled closer. By dawn, the riders arrived. 5 men in dusted coats and badges that gleamed like false promises. One stepped forward, their leader, a marshal named Briggs. "Cole Iron Forge," he shouted. "By order of the county, you're under arrest for murder and obstruction of justice." Cole opened the cabin door but didn't step out. "You're late," he said. "Justice got buried years ago." The marshal's eyes flicked past him to Prue. "And the woman? That the creature you stole from Black Ridge?" Prue stepped forward before Cole could speak. "No one stole me," she said clearly. "I walked away because you let devils run your town." Briggs sneered. "You're coming with us, both of you." Cole's voice dropped to a growl. "No, we're done being your show." The men drew their guns. Cole moved faster. The crack of the first rifle shot shattered the morning calm. The shot echoed through the valley like thunder cracking over stone. Birds burst from the trees. Smoke hung in the cold air. Cole didn't hesitate. He grabbed Prue's hand and pulled her behind the heavy oak table just as another bullet tore through the cabin door. The wood splintered, scattering shards across the floor. "Stay down," he ordered. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. Prue pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding, breath shallow. She heard the men outside shouting to one another, "Surround the cabin," and the jingle of spurs moving through snow. Cole crawled toward the window, reloading his rifle with the practiced ease of a man who'd fought too many battles. "They'll try to smoke us out," he said. "We won't give them the chance." Prue clutched the small pistol he'd given her weeks ago, the metal cold in her shaking hands. "What do we do?" He glanced back, a fierce kind of pride in his eyes. We remind them what it costs to cage what won't stay caged. The first rider charged the front door, swinging a torch. Cole fired once. The man fell without a sound, the torch tumbling into the snow and hissing out. "To left flank!" Another voice yelled. Cole moved to the side window, reloading, every motion deliberate. "They'll come from the rear next. When I say move, grab the satchel by the stove. We'll head for the creek bed." Prue nodded, trying to steady her breath. "I'm not leaving without you." "You won't have to," he said. Another gunshot ripped through the window frame, grazing his shoulder. He didn't flinch, just grunted, fired back, and dropped the second attacker. Prue crawled toward him, tore a strip from her skirt, and pressed it to the bleeding wound. "You're hurt." He gave a dry laugh. Nothing compared to pride. A third man tried the back door, kicking it open, revolver drawn. Prue turned before Cole could. She aimed, hands trembling, and fired. The recoil sent her backward, ears ringing, but the man fell, his gun skidding across the floorboards. She stared at what she'd done, wide-eyed. Cole reached her side, gripping her shoulders. "Breathe," he said. "You did what you had to." Her voice cracked. "I didn't want to kill him." "I know," he said softly. "That's what keeps you human." Outside, the last two marshals hesitated, shouting for reinforcements that weren't coming. Cole stepped to the doorway, rifle leveled. "Leave your dead," he called. "Leave your lies. The mountains claimed enough blood." Silence. Then the sound of horses retreating down the slope. When it was over, Cole sagged against the wall. Prue helped him to the chair by the hearth, her hands still trembling. She cleaned the wound, wrapped it tight, and sat beside him. The cabin smelled of gunpowder and pine smoke. The fire popped, the only sound between them. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "There'll be more." Cole nodded. "Then we'll keep moving higher. The law doesn't climb as far as snow does." She smiled weakly. "Maybe it's time to stop running, Cole. Maybe it's time to start living." He looked at her, the hardness in his face softening. "With you? If you'll have me?" He took her hand, rough, scarred, trembling, and brought it to his lips. "You were never anyone's livestock, Prue. You were born free. I just tore down the bars so you could see it." Tears filled her eyes. "You tore down more than bars. You tore down everything they made me believe about myself." Outside, the first flakes of snow began to fall again, quiet as forgiveness. Cole leaned back, closing his eyes. "You'll make a fine mountain woman yet," he murmured. Prue smiled through her tears. "Then I guess I'll need to learn to split wood properly." He laughed, a low, rough sound that filled the cabin with life again, and as the firelight flickered across their faces, the mountain, ancient, silent, and vast, watched over them like a witness keeping its final secret. By the next morning, the storm clouds had passed, leaving a clean silence over the mountain. The air smelled of wood smoke and pine, the world washed new. Prue woke first. Cole still slept in the chair by the hearth, the rifle resting across his knees, his wounded shoulder rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. She watched him for a long time, the man who had broken iron and defied a town to save her dignity. For the first time, she didn't see the giant who terrified others. She saw a man who had carried too much weight alone for too long. She rose quietly and stepped outside. Snow glittered on the trees, and the creek below whispered like a lullaby. The world felt at peace, even if only for a moment. When Cole came to the door, she turned and smiled. "You should still be resting," she said. He shrugged. "Rest feels strange when you spent years running from ghosts." "They're gone now," she said. "Or at least, farther away." He stepped closer. "Not all of them, but they don't scream so loud when you're near." Her breath caught. Coal. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and said softly, "This place was a grave when you found it. Now it's home." Prue felt tears rise, but they weren't of grief. "Then we'll keep it alive, together." That evening, they buried the fallen men in the clearing, side by side, under rough wooden markers. Not out of forgiveness, but because Cole said the mountain deserved quiet. When the last shovel of earth fell, Prue touched his arm. "What will you do now?" she asked. He looked toward the horizon, where the first hint of sunset turned the peaks to gold. "Build," he said. "Plant. Hunt. Maybe laugh once in a while." She smiled. "Then I'll cook, mend, and make sure you actually do laugh." He looked at her, that rare smile reaching his eyes. "You already have." Weeks passed. The garden bloomed. A pair of robins nested in the eaves. Life, for the first time, felt simple, earned. On quiet nights, they sat by the fire, his great hand folded over hers, the silence between them thick with things that didn't need saying. One night, as the embers glowed low, Cole said, "You ever think about going back to tell them what really happened?" Prue shook her head. "No, let them keep their story. We've written ours here." He nodded slowly. "Then this is where it begins." Prue rested her head against his shoulder. "No," she whispered. "This is where it finally stops hurting." Outside, the wind rose softly, brushing through the trees like a benediction. The cabin light glowed warm against the snow, two shadows inside moving together, no longer fugitives, no longer outcasts, but two hearts remade by the mountain's mercy. And in the silence that followed, it was as if the whole wild world exhaled. Every time I tell a story like this, I'm reminded how strength doesn't always roar. It endures. Prue wasn't rescued because she was weak. She was saved because she refused to believe the world's cruelty was the final truth. And Cole, he learned that even the wildest mountain isn't freedom unless you share it with someone who sees you for who you are. If you're listening right now, tell me, where in the world are you hearing this story from? And if you still believe in love that redeems, in kindness stronger than shame, stay. The next story is for you.